Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'll be your host tonight. I am the Assistant Director with NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, North Carolina. I'm glad y'all are here. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building conversations and building community around the topic of mental health. Tonight's topic is electroconvulsive therapy, also known as ECT. What happens during this procedure? Well, according to the Mayo Clinic, ECT involves the patient being given anesthesia. Small electric currents are passed through the brain, and that triggers a brief seizure. Somehow what that does is cause changes in brain chemistry that quickly reverses symptoms of certain mental health conditions. So it's got a different reputation, but it's actually quite helpful. The treatment has been around for 80 years, yet it's widely misunderstood and controversial. Much of the stigma attached to ECT is based on early accounts where they did not administer anesthesia and the voltage was higher. That led to memory loss, even broken bones. Today, it's a whole different ballgame. It's known to be effective, even though the reputation is still a little shaky. The fact is, ECT really helps people, for example, with treatment-resistant depression. Our guest tonight can attest to that. Dr. Cynthia Piltch has been hospitalized with depression 5 times. She tried many treatments with little success, but ECT helped her turn that around. We'll be hearing her story in just a moment. As usual, the first part of our show will be an interview with our guest. Then we'll show a brief video of the week and spend time taking questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience. Now let's take just a moment to thank our funders. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. We really do appreciate their guidance and their support. All right, moving right along. I'm so happy to have Cynthia with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Peg. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. We always like to know the backstory of our guests. Maybe you can tell us your story in a nutshell.
Okay, in a nutshell, a little bit of my professional background is that I'm a health educator, a Reiki master teacher, a massage therapist, and a certified peer specialist. I'm married with one 24-year-old daughter. I've had, as you said, 5 episodes of depression over 30 years, all of which coincided with or followed physical health concerns. And in terms of my recovery process, I see it as ongoing and includes physical, mental, and emotional self-care, such as exercise, meaningful work, therapy, ECT, medication, peer support, acupuncture, and Reiki. I'm a passionate advocate for people having choices in their treatment.
Right. Very good. I love that holistic approach. You've touched on so many elements of health, different facets of it, and they all work together. So let's go ahead and focus on ECT. I know there are many topics you could speak to based on your lived experience and professional qualifications. How do people respond when you tell them you've had electroconvulsive therapy? How much stigma do you get?
It depends. What I would say is that in general, it's gotten better over the last couple of decades. You hear fewer, "Oh, why are you frying your brain?" kinds of comments, which I got at a NAMI sponsored panel discussion about 5 years ago.
Whoa.
From peers, not from the medical profession. And that is the hardest thing, is the amount of trauma associated with having a lack of support from fellow peers. Granted, it's important that ECT be a treatment of choice as opposed to a treatment forced on somebody. But in my case, it's absolutely been a treatment that I have pursued. So, it's particularly challenging for me when people presume that I'm being oppressed by having. And so I think in some ways harder than the kind of questioning, oh, why did you choose that? Or why are you doing that? The harder one is the pregnant pauses when somebody doesn't say anything and their face says everything, of like, you must be crazy. Well, you are crazy, but you must be especially crazy to use a treatment like that.
Wow.
I bet
Ouch.
people are curious about my experience. And at worst, I've gotten, the you are kidding, or worse, that pregnant pause. Most people around the globe, professionals and lay people, think of it as the last resort. It's like when everything else has failed, that's like your last chance.
Okay. I can relate to some of that when people push very hard back against medication.
Yep.
Personally, I waited too long to take medication. So now I feel like, no, I don't even want to discuss lowering my dosage or anything like that. I had a feeling like everyone does counseling, but I didn't want to be one of those people who took meds. And now I'm like, no, I don't want to change that at all.
It's like the reverse of the smoker who then doesn't want anybody to smoke. It's kind of like, the value of it. So the last thing you want to do is mess with it.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's not broken anymore. Don't fix it. So tell me about the actual experience. Does it hurt? How do you feel when you wake up?
Okay. Let me just say, and I'm an educator by training and orientation. So I'm going to probably preface everything with, it depends. I'm going to tell you about my experience and what I've seen in other people in the waiting room, in the ECT and in the recovery room. But it's all my perceptions. But what I would say is, obviously there's individual variation, but because people, as you said, now get muscle relaxants and anesthesia, there's really no pain while you're going through the procedure. And it's a pretty quick procedure. I don't know if you saw the PBS special in which they actually gave me a treatment. It's very quick. That part is very quick. But when I wake up from the procedure, I have often had some lightheadedness from the anesthesia, occasional headache, that neither of which last very long. Generally, the ECT process lasts a couple of hours, with the actual treatment only a few minutes, and the bulk of the time in the recovery room for the effects from anesthesia. And they then ask you not to drive for a day and to kind of take it easy, just as you would if you went in to have some skin thing removed and you had general anesthesia. It's the anesthesia that's the real tricky part.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's time consuming. It sounds like you have to set aside a day or at least an afternoon for it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. So one of the side effects is memory loss. Tell us about that and what your doctor told you.
Well, remember, I've done it off and on for 30 years. 30 years ago, they told me a whole lot less than they tell you now. And I wasn't in a shape, I think, 30 years ago when I was so despondent. All I wanted, I didn't care what went along with it. But now they will tell you that particularly during a series of ECT treatments, your memory can get affected. It usually comes back once the treatments have abated. But sometimes, depending on what kind of ECT you get, ECT is either on one side of the brain or on two sides. And when it's done bilaterally, you're more likely to get ongoing memory issues. So what I will tell you, Peg, is 30 years ago when I had a series of ECT treatments, I probably had, it's probably a series of maybe 12 or 15. I don't remember anything in that period of my life. And I don't think I got a whole lot of it back. But to tell you the truth, it didn't matter to me, because when I was profoundly depressed, my memory was really bad too. Right. And the trade-off is not even close. I'd rather have less memory. My only gripe, and you can tell about my sense of humor, smart ass that I am, that my only gripe is that you can't choose which memories to forget.
They need to work on that, don't they?
I do. Perfect this as a special extra duty thing. So what I would say is, it is bulk of the time, again, is the recovery and the effects of the anesthesia. And in terms of memory loss, people underestimate how much depression impacts their memory. And what I have found is that obviously when you're having one side of the brain, which is where they try to do it now, unilateral, and you have settings that are very short. You were talking about the voltage, very light. They try to do the least amount possible and obviously get an effect. And so the less is more, right? So the better you are at sort of handling a smaller dosage, they're going to go with that. And I would say what people tell you depends on where you go. And I have to say that I've been spoiled, because I have seen 3 different hospital settings in my 30 years of dealing with this. And I would definitely, without question, walk extra miles to be able to continue to go for ECT treatments at McLean Hospital in Belmont. It is premier. And the premier part are the staff. That's what makes all the difference.
Well, I'm so glad that you found something that worked for you and the perfect place for you to take in that treatment.
Peg, I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention one more thing. The issue of memory loss. I think it's important for me to tell you that I'm currently working as part of a team at McLean, putting together a cognitive remediation curriculum to help people come back in terms of their memories. And we've tried it out on a few different cohorts, and we're actually now trying to do a study, which I'm going to say when it gets proven to be effective, people from across the country will have access to. But as you know, you don't get that unless you go and do the academic research route. So,
right. All right, folks. Well, you heard it here first. On Thursdays with NAMI, they're working on a protocol to keep your memories going. And I did, as soon as you started talking, it occurred to me, when I've been in a down place, a dark place, my memory is terrible. So I can't imagine it would be much worse. Yeah, interesting. All right, what else have we got here? So this question occurred to me. Did your anxiety increase around the idea of getting ECT? As I mentioned, when I started taking antidepressants, my anxiety was up just in principle because I was taking antidepressants.
Absolutely. What I would say is, and again, it depends, I think, on your situation. Remember what's important to say to you, and you'll get this in a flash. I had tried 13 antidepressants before I pleaded for ECT. So for me, ECT couldn't be worse than the effects of the 13 meds that didn't work and often made me worse. So that's the context, okay? That said, of course I was a little nervous, because anything where you get anesthesia and they put you out, I mean, that's scary, right? And it's the unknown. But what I would say is that in pair with that, I felt a hopefulness, because I had seen ECT work on a woman 20 years earlier, and I saw her come back from being catatonic. And wow. I actually asked the doctors for ECT, and they were resistant because they saw me as an academic type person, and they were telling me all the problems with it. And I was saying, it can't be worse than where I am now. And so I actually, after the first treatment, I felt a lot better because I felt hopeful. I thought it was going to work. And guess what? It did.
Light at the end of the tunnel. That makes a big difference. All right. So as we mentioned earlier, you're featured in a documentary on ECT, part of a series called The Mysteries of Mental Illness on PBS, and you were filmed during the treatment. How did all of that come about?
Yeah. It isn't the sort of thing where they put a help wanted ad in the newspaper, right? I mean, what happened is I told you that I actually did volunteer work at McLean long before I was a patient there, because I went there because it's a premier place to see about starting a support group. And they were open to that. And so I was working there before I became a patient. And I made a deal with the head of the ECT department that I would start this support group. I would bust my chops to get people to attend. You know what that's like. But only if I had his word that if I ever needed ECT again, I wouldn't be excommunicated from there because of conflict of interest. And bless his soul, he kept his word. And I did end up going. But because I knew the staff, both as a volunteer long before I was a patient, he and I knew each other pretty well. And in fact, we did an event with NAMI Boston, not NAMI Mass. And it's at that event that both of us basically got attacked. So I knew what a caring person he was. And what happened is that PBS approached McLean and wanted to do some work on their brain study work and on ECT very specifically, because they have a very large practice, a very well-respected practice. I think they do something like 10,000 treatments a year. And so they approached Steve Steiner, who is the head of it. And he then approached me and said, would you consider talking to these filmmakers? And would you consider having them film? And I want you to really think about it carefully. And I said, well, I'm going to go home and talk to my husband and my daughter about this and such. And I did. And so I gave it a lot of careful thought. And what I basically decided, Peg, was that, I'm Jewish, and there's a quote by Hillel, one of the prophets, who says, if I am not for me, who will be? If I am only for me, what am I? And I saw this as a health educator and as a peer. What could be more important than how could I possibly help dispel the ridiculous stigma there is about ECT even today without putting myself on the line? And so I did.
Well, I applaud your courage. It's a wonderful thing to do. And that will be our video of the week. So we'll be watching that. If you don't mind, I could quickly find something else.
No, it's fine. I'll tell you something funny about that later. But yes. And so I think it speaks volumes about McLean's team that they've embraced my personal requests to keep a Reiki stuffed animal with me when I have ECT, and also and ask and have somebody hold my hand as I'm going out with the anesthetic. And then macro level to support both the cognitive remediation effort and the the incredible opportunities to have a support group. And it's the only support group I know, Peg, that is a combined clinical nurse and peer specialists doing it together. So,
Interesting.
so they're really known for a lot of innovation and caring. And so I feel very honored to be connected with them.
Well, that's just sounds like a great example of patient-centered care. So,
Yeah. Yes,
stuff.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So it occurs to me as we've talked about this that perhaps some folks would benefit from some background. When we say peer on the show, we're referring to someone who has lived experience with a mental health challenge. And why would a peer have an issue with someone else taking meds or getting ECT? Probably because they themselves had some involuntary treatment that was traumatic. And so you have different camps of people who live with mental illness. And some are very open and advocate whatever treatment works for you is fine, do that. And some are very focused on the civil rights of individuals and don't ever tell me to do anything. And meds are a way of controlling people. There are a lot of different, it's like with any topic, you have a lot of different theories out there. So I'll just leave it at that. But that's what we're referring to.
Yeah, it's with lived experience. And I guess one of the things that was particularly challenging for me when I'm dealing with people who have lived experience, being judgmental about
Right.
what one of us chooses to do. If anything, you learn that it all depends, right? What works today might not work tomorrow, and what works for you might not work for me. And what's important is to be tolerant and,
Right.
and accepting and open to asking about something as opposed to assuming it. So,
Yeah, I agree completely. I've had someone make a comment to me about medication that, well, maybe someday you'll be strong enough to taper off, something like that. And I thought, what's the difference between saying that versus saying, well, if you pray a little more, then you'll be able to get off that medication. Or
what's the difference between having a mental health challenge and having diabetes, where you take,
right.
where you take insulin? Would that person say, well, maybe someday you'll be strong enough that you won't need the insulin? Hello?
Right. So obviously here at NAMI, we're about tolerance, acceptance. We support recovery, and that is defined by the individual who has the mental health challenge. So that's how we see it here. Okay. So today you're a strong and visible advocate, Cynthia. At one time, you didn't want folks knowing about your mental health conditions. Of course, it's a process, right? Then one day you were in the hospital and you asked your husband to call your rabbi and arrange a visit. How did that go?
Well, I have to say, without question, Peg, that request was one of the more courageous things I've done, because it got me to confront my own internal stigma in a very direct way, because I was scared about what Rabbi Jaffe, his name is Jaffe, would think of me. I mean, that's what it's all about being a peer. I don't want people to dismiss me because I have a mental health condition. I don't want that to define me. At the same time, why should I have to deny that that's a part of me? And so having him come see me in a vulnerable place as that was really hard. And yet he did it so beautifully. In hindsight, this was like, 13 years ago now. Because he didn't pretend that this was a natural thing for him to do. He didn't say, well, I've been doing this for 5 years or whatever. I was one of the first people, I think, who ever allowed him to come. And he was able to share that with me, because when I said, how often do you do this? Not often enough, he said. He knew that there was great need in the congregation, but also great shame and stigma. And so by his being able to be so warm and caring and accepting was really wonderful. And you said the thing about me being an advocate. Even when I was in the hospital, fighting for my life, really. I was saying, we got to do something about the stigma of this in the congregation. People have to be able to talk about this. I want to start an initiative. And bless his soul, he said, okay.
All right.
First, you focus on getting better, on taking care of you. Then come talk to me and we'll do it. And I did, and he did.
That's fabulous. You must be pretty convincing, because when you wanted a support group, you got that support group at the hospital.
Person. I'm a sincere and I'm a passionate person. I care deeply about what I care about and who I care about. And so, yeah, and I think about things. I didn't just do it impulsively, Peg. I mean, I gave it some thought. As much thought as I could give it in the hospital with, you know what I'm saying, but it wasn't just off the cuff. I was prepared to do the work that needed to be done. And
right. All right. Well, I'm so glad that you had that first visit, and I'm so glad it went well.
Me too.
So tell us about that initiative, Temple Isaiah's mental health initiative.
Okay. Well, 12 years ago, it started. The rabbi, it was a partnership. I asked him, how do I build this? Because I was pretty new to the temple, not brand new, but pretty. And I wasn't a power broker. So I was saying, what do I do? And he said, you got to go talk to all of these people and get them on the line. And I did all of that. And then I said, and you need to tell me who are some good folks to ask to be on the committee that you think will be movers and shakers with other people. And so he did that. So we really were a partnership at the beginning, and it put together a team, and it took almost a year, Peg, to have our first event, because we did it really carefully. And our first event was involved before having what's it called? House meetings to ask people about their lives and what kinds of services they would want. And so we did a lot of qualitative research. I'm a qualitative researcher by training. But we also did a lot of, at the same time, it's like you building this Thursdays, with NAMI, is you're building at the same time that you're running projects and creating a momentum. And so our first event involved Kitty Dukakis, Michael Dukakis, one of our folks talking about her life, having a schizophrenic mother, and I coming out of the closet. The four of us spoke, in moderated way, and the rabbi did the moderation. And there were like 300 people there. And one of the things that my colleague, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, whose mother had schizophrenia, said is, the Dukakises got them there, but we kept them there.
There you go.
And I said, you go, girl, you go. And so that was like our premiere. And we have done an enormous amount of programming in the synagogue over the last 12 years. I'm about to step down, thank God, as chair after 12 years.
Wow.
I've tried a few times before. And this year, as an example, we're putting together a resource guide on mental health related issues for people in the congregation. And we're going to have a concert with a place that I should definitely tell you guys about. It's called the Me Too Orchestra. And it is an orchestra that's very good. But in addition to being very good musicians, I don't know, a good percentage of folks there have mental health diagnoses. And so it's sort of like a twofer, and we hope we're going to have a concert in April. So So the mental health initiative has taken many forms. I like to believe that when Rabbi Jaffe sort of started this with me, he said, listen, I want to tell you one thing. I said, yes, you have to be patient. I said, let's be real. You know that is not one of my strengths. He said, I'm telling you, you need to at least try to tone it down because you are undertaking the challenge of moving a glacier in terms of mental health stigma. And I want to tell you that probably 4 years ago, we had an event talking about eating disorders where everybody on the panel, the professionals, the people with conditions, were all members of our congregation. And I looked at Rabbi Jaffe and I said, well, some glaciers move faster than others.
Oh, good for you. That's a wonderful story. And speaking of wonderful stories, last time you were here, you told a story about how you communicated with your daughter about mental illness because you wanted to have that door open. Talk about that.
Talk about memories, Peg. You are awesome. Well, you asked in your questions you sent me what do my children, I only have one, know about my condition. And the fact is she knows, I think, all there is to know, because I took the stance that I was going to answer what she asked, as opposed to tell her what I thought she should know. And we all know that kids are ready for things at different stages. And so 12 years ago, when I went into the hospital with profound depression, it was my second depressive episode, but the first that she'd ever seen, she was astounded that I was going to the hospital or that I had depression, because I always look happy, sound happy. I'm a pretty peppy person. You can probably see that. And so she was really totally startled and frightened by it. And so she wanted to know two things. One, had she done anything?
Oh.
And two, would I come home? Would I get better? And my husband, this is why having a partner who is a mensch, good person, and also in sync is so important. We're a real team. He told her in a way that I couldn't assure her that indeed he knew that I would fight tooth and nail to do everything to come home, and that he believed I would, and that she hadn't done anything to cause this, that this was a biochemical condition, and tried to explain it to her as best we could. And I think she has come to understand that when I'm going for an ECT treatment, she's 24 now, she'll often the day after my treatment call to ask, how did it go? A lot of, stuff. But I think that makes a difference, to sort of know that it's okay to ask anything. And if I don't want to answer it then or ever, I can say something. That dialogue is very important.
Right. And if she ever needed to talk about mental health, she would not be fearful because you had that candor.
Exactly. Well, and what was very important to me is that when people said, well, weren't you scared about the messages you were giving her? I said, no, I was relieved by the messages. I wish my mother had given me similar messages, which is that if there's a problem, face it, talk about it, go and get help. That's a good thing.
That's exactly right. Wonderful comments in the chat. That's brilliant as a strategy, answering questions to give your daughter as much information as she needed. And your husband's response was so beautiful. And I agree with those from Gary and Gail, respectively. Are there other effective treatments for depression that people should know about but do not?
Well, I don't know what people know. And let me just say, this changes every minute, it feels like. There's always something new out there. And one of the things I've come to realize is that the fact that it's a possibility doesn't mean it's been tested and has been proven to be effective. But there are a few that I would at least tell people to take a look at and I don't know the order either. This is the other thing, Peg. I don't know what order people should check things. I think ECT should be on the docket a lot earlier than it is. I don't think you have to go through 13 medications that fail for you to potentially, give a whirl with ECT. But the ones that sort of immediately come to mind, just because of my experience at McLean, are TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. Some people really try that before they try ECT because it's less invasive in terms of you don't need, to have anesthetic. On the other hand, you have to go every day for 30 days and you don't necessarily know whether it's going to work or not. Another treatment that I've been hearing a lot about from people I respect a lot is ketamine. And I'm in fact involved with a group at Cleveland Clinic that's doing a study comparing ketamine and ECT and which is more effective. What are the, trade-offs? I'm not in the study. I'm a advisory panel kind of person. And, I think there's brain stimulation, deep brain stimulation. And then they're on the sort of holistic side, there's acupuncture and Reiki. I have seen both of those be helpful to people when they're dealing with depression. So any of those, I think, are worth potential try. And then, of course, there's all the supplements that some people use. Those are like drugs, I mean, I'm very sensitive to those things. And so I think having good people to bounce these things off of and talking to people who have been through them makes a world of difference. Instead of just assuming that, it's going to have whatever the advertisement says, or that you should be terrified of it because it's not what your doctor suggests first.
Right. Well, that was a good summary. I appreciate that. Why don't we go ahead and wrap up the interview portion of the show? We have quite a few questions in the Q&A. And viewers, please feel free to type those questions. We're going to hit as many as we can before 8:30. And we usually do get to them all. Before we move to our video of the week, I want to give a big shout out to our volunteers working behind the scenes, in particular, St. Aug's work-study student Bria Motley. Thanks for being here yet again. Executive Director Gary Kreitz on chat and psychiatric nurse Gail Pruitt on Facebook. Thank you for always being here. And of course, thanks to Cynthia for spending your evening and sharing your story with us. All right, so now let's have a look at this PBS video. It's just a few minutes long. It's from a series called The Mysteries of Mental Illness. Let's check it out.
I was terrified of ECT and thought, how barbaric can you be? Because my only image of it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. My first depressive episode 25 years ago, when I walked out of that hospital, I said, I will never be in a psychiatric hospital again. I will beat this. I will find a way to overcome this, and saw it as an obstacle, and it didn't matter how deep it ran in my family. So when it happened again, that was devastating. It's like some creature has inhabited my body. And it's a creature that is very disdainful of me and sees no good in the world and no good in me. So who wants to stay there? Who wants to live with that?
Cynthia has been hospitalized 5 times, and like about a third of those with depression, has tried many treatments with little success.
I have always been on an antidepressant and a mood stabilizer, but I have also used talk therapy, Reiki, acupuncture, and massage. Over the years, I've tried all of it. I may be the only person that I know for sure who begged for ECT. I don't see this as a panacea. That said, I think that it's critically important to give people a choice.
All right, there we go.
Thanks. I'll see you. Bye-bye. Thanks, honey.
To treat her latest.
Oh boy.
It just broke up, huh?
Yeah, so the video is buffering. I'm not sure why that happened.
Well,
But I think probably people get a sense of what that video is about and how courageous it was for you to do that.
well, I think what's missing there is the actual treatment. And so it's worthwhile. I think actually Steve Seiner, who was the doctor who was talking to me, was disturbed that they went back to talking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I said, you know what? They had to do that to show the contrast between what it was and what it is now. But I think the level of care that is taken in terms of protecting patients' well-being is really quite impressive.
Absolutely. I just put the link to the video in the chat. And so if you'd like to copy and paste that, viewers, you can check that out as soon as we're done and see the whole thing. So thanks for your patience.
Peg, would you send that to me? Would that be okay sometime? Thanks.
Yeah, it's pbs.org and then a lot of other stuff. So I'll send that to you in an email. All right, let's get to these questions. What can you say about numbers of treatments in your several 6 questions and treatments of others?
Say that again.
What can you say about the number of ECT treatments in your sessions?
My session. Okay. It depends. That's going to be something I'm going to say generally, which I think is true for everybody. Usually when somebody is starting off a series of ECT treatments, it's probably goes up to 12. They want to, on the one hand, get you to a point where the depression lightens, but they don't want to stop too soon because they don't want you to lose ground. So there's some, real, they watch very carefully. They take a lot of tests in terms of your cognitive abilities at the beginning and so there's a lot of both quantitative and qualitative information that they collect as they decide, and they kind of go as they decide. One thing I need to sort of share with you all is that in general, most people have a series of ECT treatments and then stop. And then they usually go back to just having their meds. Very few people ever just stop and don't need anything else because they're dealing with chronic mental health challenges. Occasionally, relatively speaking, people like Kitty Dukakis over the years, who has no ability to take medicine, has for years done what's called maintenance ECT, which means instead of waiting till she gets depressed, she goes every, 6 weeks and has a treatment to prevent it from coming back. And that has been an incredibly effective approach for her. And one of the things I'm going to share is that I had 2 depressive episodes 10 years apart. That wasn't a concern. Then 5 years ago, I had breast cancer. And after the breast cancer, I have had 3 episodes. And after the last one a year ago, I said, which was particularly brutal one, I said, I do not ever want to go back there. So I have chosen to start doing maintenance ECT. And so I go every 5 to 7 or 8 weeks for a treatment over the last year. Whether I'll stay with that long term, I don't know. But I know that I needed to know that I wasn't going to sink,
Right.
especially with the winter, and I'd had COVID. I mean, for me, physical illness always is a trigger for the depressive stuff. So what I just want to say, it all depends how many, depends on what your status is and what the read is with your doctors. And it's why it's really, really important. I believe that ECT docs and folks dealing with cancer, are the practitioners that need to be very mind-body oriented to do their job really well.
And so typically would you have a series of ECT treatments, and are they a week apart? Are they days apart?
Okay, that's a really good question. Usually at the start, you do it 3 times a week because you want to maintain the momentum for a couple of weeks. And then you gradually elongate how long between treatments. So by the time you're having your 12th treatment, let's say, you're not doing that, 2 weeks later. You're probably doing that 4 or 5 weeks later.
I see. And if you decide you want to stop in the middle, how will the doctors respond to that?
Well, if you decide you want to stop, it's your right. Contrary to what the image is, particularly, I have to say, one of the NAMI folks at this session that was so controversial with Steve and me, nobody's forcing you to do it. They can be heavy-handed at saying, you're really putting yourself at risk by stopping this. But nobody is forcing you to do it.
But it's not like a medication where you might have to taper down or you'll really feel some serious withdrawal type symptoms. Okay.
No, not that I'm aware of. The truth is, Peg, I don't know. There may be, excuse me, I haven't heard any clinicians say, you know what, if you want to get off, let's go down to 2 next week and then 1 the following week. For me, it's always been the opposite of, what do I need to do to maintain my level of well-being? How often? What's the minimum amount I have to do? So because with maintenance, for instance, they try stretching out that interval longer and longer. When I go in for a treatment, I only go in for 1 treatment. I don't go for 3 in a row, for instance. But if I run into a problem and I'm feeling like I'm really, really struggling and the depression is coming in, I might go for 1 or 2 or 3 treatments to try to stop it.
Okay. Next question. I've had treatment-resistant major depressive disorder for decades and had a series of ECT treatments in 2015. I had temporary memory loss where things were in my house, driving directions, and have seemingly permanent memory loss of personal memories, birth of both nephews, grandfather's funeral, etc. It is very upsetting, and I experience a PTSD-ish reaction when I see anything related to ECT. How common is the more severe memory loss? I'm sorry you went through that.
I'm very, very sorry. I don't know the answer for sure. I know that it's relatively less, but I also know that people are incredibly sensitive to memory loss, and there's a lot of understandable reactions to it, and that's part of what led us to try to come up with a program that might help people retrieve their memories and deal more effectively with accepting what is and not necessarily fighting it. because fighting it is very hard. On the one hand, it's very, very sad. There are things about my life that I do not remember, a whole periods. But for me, and I'm not saying for anybody else, for me, the trade-off is worth it, because if I could not have functioned being in the state I was in, and I wouldn't have enjoyed any of what I was in. I would not have probably even been aware of it, because I was so depressed. My memory was terrible anyway. And one person who in our Dukakis support group said it really well. She said, you know what? I have determined that I'd rather make new memories than worry about the ones I've had to let go. And I know that's easier said than done. And I do not want to minimize the effects of how hard it is. I get incredibly frustrated because one of my hallmarks my whole life has been a phenomenal memory, and it's no longer true. And I've had to come to terms with that. And so I'm sorry for you. At the same time, I know that there are other costs to doing other treatments, potentially.
Yeah.
I hope that's at least a little helpful.
That's an authentic answer. And yeah, again, I'm very sorry to the writer of that question that you went through that. Honestly, my own memory was never that great, so I would have a lot less at stake. All right. So question from someone who's had ECT a couple of times. You mentioned some things that work today, but not tomorrow. Did that ever happen with your ECT? This person says, my second series of treatments seemed less effective.
I've been incredibly lucky. It's worked for me every time, sometimes quicker than other times. And that had to do with how depressed I was. The last depressive episode that came on the heels of COVID, and also on, on the heels of having my prescriber suggest that instead of starting ECT, that I go and increase my Prozac, and that would probably help. And instead, what it did was turned it into a what the Steve Siner called a nihilistic depression. I mean, I was like a zombie. It was like I had no will to do anything. And that took, I think that I had 19 ECT treatments that time. And that's the only time, except maybe the first time. So that's a sign of just how profoundly depressed I was. And it was after that that I decided, okay, I'm not going back there if I have any choice. So I'm going to do maintenance ECT.
Okay. Well, I guess it's like with anything, there's always variability. I haven't heard the term nihilistic depression, so I'll definitely be Googling that after the show. Yeah.
I hadn't heard it either, Peg. But when I heard it, I thought, oh yeah, that means it's really serious. And this is really serious. I mean, I am a high energy, very upbeat person by nature. And so when I have no get up and go for anything, it's bad.
Yeah, it resonates because that they say the thought process of depression is I'm bad, the world is bad, the future is bad. And that points to that.
I tend to not be, I didn't grow up being a very confident person, even though I appear confident. I'm very self-critical to begin with. But when I'm depressed, I can't do anything right. My husband kiddingly jokes that when he starts seeming too perfect, he knows I'm getting really sick.
That's cute. Sounds like he has a good way of phrasing things. Good humor.
Yeah.
Comments now, which I appreciate. You are positively heroic, Cynthia. Love the way you advocate for treatments. And this is from Tom Mayer. Are you aware of Andrew Nierenberg, MD at Mass General, and his research?
I love him. I just had a consult with him.
Okay. And so that's his research in the bipolar clinic and research program on mitochondria. It's new information for me.
Yes, he's very creative. He's very, I'm Jewish, so you have to bear with me. There's going to be a little Yiddish. It's called mensch, means the good person. He is a really good person. And the reason I was having a consult with him, without going into gory detail, is that one neurologist told me I needed to get off of lithium ASAP, and then turned around and said, no, you don't. And so I went to Dr. Nierenberg for a read from him. And he was just so approachable. He speaks English. He talks about the mitochondria being so important in helping us stay well. And yes, I think his work is very important. It really means a lot to me. I suspect, Peg, that you'll agree with this. When people are very competent and humble and approachable, he doesn't have to show me how smart he is. I could find that out all on my own. And he's just a really decent guy. And that really makes a difference, because this is confusing stuff.
It is. And I know mitochondria, I'm sort of having a flashback to a biology class somewhere. What is mitochondria? Mitochondria.
Well, I should ask Tom. Is it Tom? Is that his name? Maybe he wants to share with us, but it's really the powerhouse. It's the thing that really, it's the energy mechanism, really.
Of the cell. Okay. That makes sense. So bipolar disorder, where you have boatloads of energy or very little, many people would have a linkage to the mitochondria, the energy producer of the cell. That helps. And when the PBS documentary was filmed and ECT was done, this is the next question. Were you suffering from profound depression at the time, or was the treatment done at a time when you were more asymptomatic?
Excellent question. And I'm going to show the effects of ECT. I'm not 100% sure. I know I was just on the tail end of a depressive episode, but even when I'm on the tail end, or when I'm not functioning by my standards, for a lot of people, it looks like I'm still very fine functioning. Thank you very much. I mean, when I was in the hospital a couple of times, they asked if they could send medical students in to talk to me, because they knew that I would explain to them what was going on the ward. I was functioning, but not at my best, is what I would say.
Okay, gotcha. Anonymous question, is ECT done by a physician, by a certified technician?
Physician.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
And at least at McLean, one of the things I like is they have a system where a nurse accompanies you throughout your time there, same nurse in triage, and then you see one of the doctors before you leave to check in and see how things are going. I think that's a good system.
Right, absolutely. We've got some notes about, can we talk about services in Massachusetts, or can I participate in your study? Please email those questions to me, viewers, and I'll be happy to get those to Cynthia.
I just want to say, sadly, I have to say, people outside of Massachusetts cannot, not even just outside of Massachusetts. Right now, this study is going to be for ECT patients at McLean. That is because of the way research gets operated. and for the internal review board to certify everything. And I will not even begin to tell you the frustration level of dealing with the internal and to, you know, the review board, how long it takes. So unfortunately, it's not open to other people. I hope down the line, you'll be hearing through Peg and other people through that this is like a program that people can have access to.
That's right. Wow. Well, can't wait for that day. So I have a question. You and I are pretty blessed, privileged, where we can talk about these things at work. In fact, it helps, it enhances our ability to do our job. A lot of folks are more in the closet with mental health at work, and they don't have so many options. Do you have any words of encouragement for those people? It helps so much to be authentic, but it's not always feasible for people.
I think, and let me say, I have worked in places where I could not do it. And what I will tell you is that a part of my own recovery and well-being has been to say, I'm only going to work in a place where I can own this part of myself. And I'm very, very lucky to be working at the Center of Excellence with Ann Whitman and all the other good people like Jackie, part-time. But what I would say can be very helpful is having some place where you can talk about stuff, some support group, like a NAMI support group. At least in Boston, we have the Depressed Bipolar Support Alliance. There are other peer groups where you can give space to talk about this stuff and to, you know, bounce ideas off of how to deal with particular situations. And I'm sorry, you know, it is hard, and pat yourself on the back for, you know, all that it takes. I have a colleague friend who's a school social worker, and she has been closeted for 10 years.
Oh my.
It takes so much energy out of her. But if she weren't in the closet, the fallout of her coming out of the closet would be enormous. And that's a profoundly personal decision, I think, that no one else, just like what treatment should you do, nobody else should be commenting on it unless specifically asked for advice, because there's no way that everybody can know all the complications that are involved in your life.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I love that suggestion. Find a safe space somewhere. It may not be at work, but maybe there's a person you can call on your 10-minute break just to give you a little bit of solace during the day or during your shift, whenever that happens. All right, next question from Gary. Is ECT typically available to folks with no insurance or insufficient insurance?
That's an excellent question, Gary. And the honest answer is I do not know. I believe so, because I believe, at least in Massachusetts, you know, the irony is that the people with no insurance tend to have better coverage than the sort of what I call the working poor, who have lower level insurance. So, you know what? I honestly don't know the answer. Insurance is a critical piece. I do have to tell you that one of the most moving things that, not that I needed it to sell me on Steve Seiner, was that I met a young woman in Mississippi who was profoundly depressed, found me through a website with the Dukakases, and was wanting to do ECT, but was part of the African American community, where ECT was really questioned, and she had insurance issues. And one of the things that moved me deeply is that Steve Seiner called the doctors in Mississippi and found a way to get them to treat her. And that's sometimes what it takes. It takes, one-on-one leverage. But I think there's no question that what your coverage is makes a big difference. I saw my husband, who was a lawyer, a very fine lawyer, get into an incredible battle with the insurance company, trying to get me more time in the hospital in one of my hospitalizations. And, it's just unheard of that it's really unconscionable. It's not that that it should be so hard, but that is the reality. So
That is exactly right. And I want to put in a quick plug for Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion.
Yes, Medicaid is exactly what I was talking about. So thank you, Peg.
Absolutely. We don't have it yet in North Carolina. It would help over 500,000 individuals to get health insurance who currently lack it. And again, it's that group when your income is very low, you have no insurance, you fall into Medicaid. When you have just a little bit of income, not enough to get good insurance, but too much to qualify for Medicaid, you're in that in-between area and your health really suffers. We've got a handful of Republicans in the state legislature who are interested in Medicaid expansion. Please click the link that I just put in the chat box. Check that out and advocate for Medicaid expansion. It's the best thing you can do to help folks who have mental health challenges in this state.
Absolutely. Yeah, Medicaid does really good things for people. And they have a lot of not just coverage, but quality control measures in place. It's definitely
right.
Right.
All right, next question, anonymous question. Is ECT only for major depressive disorder, or is it also helpful for bipolar depression, borderline personality disorder, etc.?
Okay. Again, I am not going to profess to have expertise. I don't. I know that the lion's share of cases for which ECT is used are profound depression. Bipolar is, I think, next. Beyond that, I do not know the answer. But you know what? I would go to Professor Google and ask about that, and ask a couple of clinicians. There is an ECT clinicians organization, and they probably maintain a lot of those stats. I just know that by and large, who I see mostly in the ECT rooms are depression and bipolar.
Got it. Okay. And both of those, of course, experience depression. Got it. So, helpful note from Kent, both Duke and UNC have financial assistance programs that at least cover Medicare copayments. And probably some of the other organizations do as well. Thank you for that information. All right. What gives you hope?
When you asked that question, it was, I have to say that there are things that are global and there are things that are personal, very personal. So globally, I have hope based on the fact that we do see progress with people being able to talk about mental health and other challenging topics like COVID in a way that I haven't seen earlier in my life. And so I hope when I'm even grayer, that it will be even better. And on a very personal level, it's sort of like what gives me the jubies, the juice. It's the ability to have fun, to laugh, to sing and dance. That gives me hope that I'm going to be able to enjoy my life, at least some of the time, maybe even most of the time. Because when I'm profoundly depressed, it is such that one of the quintessential aspects of depression is that you think it's never going to pass. You know, I have this thing up on my bookcase. It says, "This too shall pass." And I keep it up there and I want to believe it's true. But when I need it the most, it's the hardest to believe it's true, if you see what I mean. So, and so I think watching how much easier, frankly, it is for my daughter's generation to talk about feelings and mental health stuff. We went to an open house or whatever, a friend's party at their house, and there were a couple of her friends who were talking about their therapists, and I'm thinking, oh man, I could no sooner have imagined being at a party in my 20s talking about my therapist versus your therapist. I mean, it just would not have happened. And I said that is hopeful, because why should it be any different than talking about, what game you're going to, or so. It gives it much less power in your life. So that, I think, is promising.
Absolutely. And I think the more we talk about mental health and stigma, the more we take away the power of that. Yeah. So I love that answer. We have a lull in the questions right now. Feel free to ask, type them in the Q&A, type them into Facebook, and they'll be relayed to us. In the meantime, I want to make some announcements, public service announcements, just for you all. Next week is Thanksgiving. Enjoy some time off, eat some food, write a gratitude list, and hug someone you care about. But we'll be having that night off. The following Thursday is December 2nd. Thursdays with NAMI will be celebrating and focusing on the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. There are all kinds of disabilities. Some are mental health related, some are physical, some run the gamut. How do those intersect? What does that look like? We'll be talking with Sharif Brown, Program Manager for State Reentry of the Alliance of Disability Advocates here in North Carolina. He's a great speaker. Please join us on December 2nd. Also, when you leave this Zoom session, if you're on Zoom, you will find a survey magically appears on your screen. Please fill out that survey. Let us know how we did. That helps us improve over time. We want to learn and grow and evolve. Let us know what we need to do differently. I appreciate it so much. And what else have we got here? Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Cynthia?
Well, it's always dangerous, Peg, to ask me whether I have any, final thoughts, but this is what I will say. I think that staying emotionally well is a multi-pronged process. I think being able to identify what are valuable tools for you in your toolbox is more than half the battle. So for me, things like being able to go out and go for walks, being in nature, being able to do things with my hands, being able to talk with friends, being able to dance and sing, as I was saying. That's all part of it. And having some space to be kind to myself, to not just always be the supreme advocate that I am, the workaholic. I mean, my family were all worker bees, right? I don't have to be told to work. It's important to have fun too. And so, and to really take every opportunity you can to learn more and to share more with people, because we all grow that way. So, and anybody at any point who wants more information, wants a little support around ECT, because it can be a lonely road, because in addition to all the other things, you're dealing with extra stigma. And I think it's gotten better, as I said, but it has a long way to go, because I still hear physicians, psychiatrists talking about this would be like their last effort. It's like they're failing if the patient has ECT. And it's such a misguided way of looking at it, to tell you the truth. So I think it's enormously who you have as a clinician team is critical. So use places like NAMI and other peer-run organizations to find out good places that you can get reliable support. That's important.
All right. Well, I can't think of a better note to end on than that. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Again, I want to thank you, Cynthia, for spending the evening with us, and thanks to everyone in our virtual studio audience for taking time out of your day. Enjoy the holidays. If you don't, good luck and survive the holidays. I want to see you back here on December 2nd if you can make it. And thanks, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, Peg, very much.
Have a great night.
Mm.
Bye-bye.